There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the stillness is pierced by a command, not from the world, not from the self, but from the divine. Not tomorrow, not once the stars align, or the heart feels more prepared now. This is the voice that stirs us from comfort and shakes the dust from our purpose. The voice that knows we have tarried too long at the threshold of obedience. It does not wait for the perfect plan or polished faith. It speaks because the time is ripe and the delay is dangerous. There is a holy urgency in the call, not born of panic but of knowing that the seed must fall into the earth before it can become a tree, that the first step must be taken before the sea can part. You feel it, perhaps not in thunderclaps, but in the unease of waiting too long, in the stirring that refuses to sleep. That, dear soul, is not your imagination. That is the summons, and the hour is not later. The hour is now. There are moments in life when everything appears to be in order. You have your plans neatly arranged, your days carefully measured, and your fears managed by the illusion of control. You walk through life as though time belongs to you, as though you are the master of your calling and can choose the hour of its fulfillment. But then it comes, uninvited, unpredicted. A voice, not external but unmistakable, breaks into your well-managed delay. Do it now. And though it is soft, it rings louder than all your justifications. It does not argue or negotiate. It declares. This is the divine voice that does not consult your calendar. It does not wait for your confidence to catch up or your resources to be in hand. It speaks not when you feel ready, but when the time has arrived in heaven's agenda. The interruption is not rude. It is mercy. For delay is not always peace. Sometimes it is the quiet decay of purpose. And the longer you linger, the more you risk becoming a bystander to the very calling you were fashioned to fulfill. You may believe you are being careful, wise even in your waiting. But wisdom without obedience quickly turns to pride. There is a sacred kind of boldness that is born when you trust that if God has said a now, then he has already seen the path made clear, even if your eyes see only wilderness. He is not asking you to sprint blindly, but to take the next step with the conviction that he walks ahead. His interruptions are not detours, they are divine rerouting, turning you from comfort into courage. And you must understand, dear soul, that your delay does not leave heaven untouched. Time on earth is not infinite, and while grace is patient, purpose is often seasonal. The fruit that hangs heavy today may not be there tomorrow. If God has called you to act, then within that call is both the provision and the timing. He is not caught off guard. He is not testing your strength. He is awakening your trust. And what an honor it is to be stirred by the voice that formed galaxies, to be summoned by the same breath that called light out of darkness. So pause no longer. The voice you heard was not a thought, not a feeling, but a commission. And when heaven speaks, your only rightful response is to move. There is a kind of obedience that demands no applause, no explanation, and no delay. It is not rooted in the convenience of circumstances, nor does it grow in the soil of certainty. It is the obedience that answers before the mind has fully understood, before the heart has calmed its racing doubts. It springs from a place deeper than understanding, a place where faith lives unguarded, where trust is not theory but surrender. This is obedience without hesitation, and it is the kind of faith that pleases the heart of God. We are often conditioned to believe that wisdom means waiting, that spiritual maturity is proven by how long we consider our options. But the kingdom does not always move at the pace of our reflection. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is say yes before you know what yes will cost. Because when God says do it now, he is not asking for your analysis. He is asking for your analysis. He is power in the first step. Not because it is perfect, but because it is proof that you trust the one who called. Delayed obedience is not obedience at all. It is quiet rebellion cloaked in religious language. We dress it up in words like discernment and preparation, but God sees the truth of it. And still he calls, still he waits, still he loves. The story of faith has always belonged to those who moved. Abraham did not ask for a map. Moses did not wait for Pharaoh's approval. Peter stepped out of the boat before the waves had calmed. These were not heroes because they were fearless. They were obedient because they feared God more than they feared failure. And so must you be. Do not be deceived into thinking that your hesitation is harmless. The enemy of your soul will always whisper, not now. Wait until you're more prepared. Wait until you're less afraid. But that voice never runs out of reasons to postpone your purpose, and if you listen too long, you will begin to believe that delay is safety. But in truth, delay is disobedience dressed in the garments of caution. Faith in the now is not about reckless abandon. It is about holy confidence. It is the quiet assurance that if God has spoken, then he has already seen what lies ahead. He does not command without preparing the path. The step you fear to take may be the one that unlocks the miracle you've been praying for. The moment you dread may be the very place where heaven meets earth on your behalf. So do not wait until you feel brave. Do not wait until you feel holy. Move because he said move. Obey because he is worthy. Act not out of fear of what will happen if you don't, but out of love for the one who asks you to. When faith meets the moment, miracles unfold. And when God says do it now, he is offering you a chance to walk not just in obedience, but in glory. There is a lie we often tell ourselves: if only the conditions were perfect, if only the moment was right, then we could act. It's a lie so subtle that it often masquerades as wisdom. We wait for the stars to align, for circumstances to be just so, for the inner peace that signals we're ready. And in doing so, we miss the point entirely. The perfect moment is a myth, a mirage that disappears the moment we get close. Waiting for it is an excuse for inaction, a cover for the fear that lurks beneath the surface. God does not operate on the timetable of our comfort. He does not call us to wait until we feel equipped or until we have enough knowledge. His commands are not contingent upon our readiness, but upon his sovereignty. When he says now, it is not a suggestion to be weighed against the shifting sands of ideal circumstances. It is a command to be followed because the time has come, and the time, dear soul, is always now. You may find yourself standing at the crossroads of indecision, watching as the world spins by in a seemingly perfect dance of chance, but in reality, the perfect moment is a fleeting illusion. If you wait for your fear to subside, you may wait a lifetime. If you wait for the path to be without obstacles, you may never take a step. The road God calls you to walk is not without its thorns, its shadows, its challenges, but in the midst of those challenges lies his presence. And that presence is the only perfection you will ever need. The danger of waiting for the perfect moment is that it can paralyze you. It convinces you that if you are not fully prepared, then you are unworthy to move. But this is the irony of faith. It is not the well-prepared who accomplish great things. It is the obedient, those who step out in spite of their imperfections. God does not require perfection. He requires trust, and trust often looks like stepping forward in the dark with nothing but his promise to light the way. To wait for the perfect moment is to deny the reality of grace, for it is grace that empowers you to move, even when you are unsure, even when you are afraid. It is grace that turns your lack of readiness into the soil for growth. What the world calls imperfections, God calls opportunities for his glory to be made manifest. The very place where you feel least qualified is often the place where he shows himself most powerful. So if you find yourself standing still, waiting for the perfect moment to arrive, remember this: the moment will never arrive. But if you move in faith, in obedience to the call that is now, you will find that the perfect moment is not something that comes to you, but something that is made as you step forward. There are moments in life when time itself seems to bend, when the usual constraints of the ticking clock fall away, and what matters most is not the passage of time, but the obedience to a calling. When God calls, time bows, not because time itself is a mere servant, but because the call is weightier than any earthly schedule. There is a holy urgency that accompanies the voice of the Creator. It does not speak in terms of delay, indecision, or negotiation. It speaks in terms of purpose, and purpose does not wait for the clock to tick its way to convenience. The urgency of God's call is not born of desperation, but of destiny. When he says now, it is because there is a moment that must be seized, a door that must be opened, a path that must be walked. Every second of hesitation is a missed opportunity for the work he has prepared for you. There is divine rhythm in his timing, a cadence that waits for no man but invites every soul to step into its flow. When God speaks, time aligns with his will, and the moment becomes sacred. We are often tempted to believe that we control time, that we can set the pace, that we can afford to wait for a better moment. But this is an illusion. Time does not belong to us. It is a gift, a fleeting one at that. And when God calls, He invites you to step into a moment that is outside of your control, but fully within His design. The urgency is not meant to overwhelm you, but to awaken you to the importance of the hour. To remind you that this moment, this very moment, is not to be squandered. There is a danger in ignoring this urgency. It is not a matter of rushing blindly, of forcing yourself into action out of a sense of panic. Rather, it is the urgent call to recognize that there is no time to waste when God's plan is unfolding before you. Every delay, every second of hesitation is an opportunity missed. The road before you may not be perfectly paved, but the call is clear, and in answering it, you step into a divine purpose that stretches beyond the confines of your understanding. God's call is not bound by our sense of time. When He says now, it is because the time is ripe, the harvest is ready, and your obedience will bring forth fruit in a way that cannot be replicated. When you respond with urgency, you step into the flow of His eternal purpose, where time itself becomes a tool for His glory. The clock may still tick, but in that moment the eternal becomes tangible, and you are part of something far greater than the passing seconds. So heed the call when it comes, for in the urgency of God's voice lies the fullness of life. It is not a command to rush in fear, but a summons to act in faith. Time bows to His will, and in His will you find your purpose. Procrastination is a subtle thief creeping into the corners of our minds, whispering that there is always time, that the task can wait, that the call will not change with the passage of time. But in truth, procrastination is not simply the delay of action, it is the erosion of purpose. The longer you wait, the more the dream begins to fade, the clearer the path becomes obscured by doubt and distraction. What you once knew to be a divine calling turns into a distant hope, swallowed by the uncertainty of tomorrow. When God says do it now, He is not merely asking for action, He is inviting you to move in alignment with His divine purpose. Every moment of hesitation, every second of delay pulls you further from the life you were meant to lead. For the life of purpose is a life of action, not in the frantic urgency of our own doing, but in the steady confidence of moving when God moves. It is not about rushing ahead or waiting until all the conditions are ideal. It is about walking in step with the rhythm of heaven, where each step is in response to His call. Procrastination often masquerades as caution or prudence. We think we are being careful, waiting for the perfect conditions, but the truth is that we are often afraid of failing, afraid of being unprepared, afraid of stepping into the unknown. But moving when God moves is not about feeling ready. It is about trusting that God's timing is always perfect, even if our understanding is not. It is trusting that He will provide what is needed at each stage, and that the fear of not being enough is met by His perfect sufficiency. To move when God moves is to acknowledge that the waiting is not merely about passing time, it is about purpose. Every moment spent idle is a moment where the purpose of God's calling is postponed. This is not to say that we should rush into decisions without discernment, but there is a difference between waiting for wisdom and waiting out of fear. If you have heard God's call, then the only question left is whether you will step forward, trusting that He has already gone before you. In this moving, there is a shift from procrastination to purpose. When you act in faith, you realize that every step, no matter how small, is part of the greater journey. You are no longer waiting for something to change. You are stepping into the change that God has already ordained, and with every movement your purpose becomes clearer. Each act of obedience, each decision to move when He moves, reaffirms that you are walking in the path He has prepared for you, a path that leads to fulfillment, to meaning, to the very destiny for which you were created. So, stop delaying, stop waiting for the fear to subside. Stop waiting for the perfect moment that will never come. When God says do it now, He is giving you a window into your purpose, an opportunity to step out of procrastination and into the fullness of His will. There is a mysterious blessing in swift obedience, one that often eludes the cautious and hesitant heart. It is not a blessing that can be grasped by intellect alone or weighed by the measure of our preparedness. It is the blessing of trusting God without delay, of stepping out when His voice calls, even if all the details are not yet clear. There is a deep joy, a quiet peace that comes when you obey without hesitation, when you move in response to God's call before fear can take root, before doubt can cloud the path. The world tells us to weigh our decisions, to count the costs, to ensure we are ready before we take any step. But God's ways are different. He calls us to move quickly, to respond with the same immediacy with which He speaks. And in that swift obedience, there is a hidden treasure, a richness that cannot be found in the cautious calculation of waiting. For when we obey without hesitation, we step into a realm where God's provision is not delayed either. His answers, His support, His grace are woven into every step of our journey, but only when we take that first step in trust. This swift obedience is not the same as reckless action. It is not about rushing ahead in our own strength or understanding. It is the obedience of a heart that is so attuned to the voice of God that when He speaks there is no need for second guessing, no room for the whispers of doubt. It is the kind of obedience that comes from a place of deep trust, knowing that God's commands are never burdensome, but always a pathway to His perfect will. The blessing of swift obedience is also one of protection. When we obey quickly, we align ourselves with God's will, and in doing so, we find ourselves shielded from the dangers of delay. Procrastination and hesitation often open the door to confusion and discouragement. But when we act in faith, when we follow His call with immediacy, moreover, there is a joy in the immediate act of obedience that cannot be replicated. There is a deep satisfaction in knowing that we have responded to God's voice, not because we were ready, but because He is worthy of our trust. In that moment of swift obedience, you experience the fullness of His presence, the peace that passes understanding, and the joy of walking in step with your Creator. The blessing is not just in the outcome, but in the act itself. The joy of simply moving when He moves, trusting that He will provide everything you need along the way. To obey swiftly is to acknowledge that God's plan is greater than any delay we could manufacture. It is to declare with every step that we trust His timing, His provision, and His purpose. And as we move in His will, we discover that the blessings He has for us are not just rewards for action. They are the very fulfillment of His divine plan, unfolding in our lives as we follow Him without hesitation. As we come to the close of this reflection on the call of God, there remains one fundamental truth. God does not speak to delay us, but to lead us. When He says, "Do it now," He is not presenting an option for consideration. He is offering an invitation to step into the fullness of His divine purpose. The urgency of His call is not born from impatience, but from love, from a desire to see His kingdom come to fruition in your life. Every moment of hesitation, every second of delay only prolongs the arrival of that very purpose He has ordained for you. The temptation to wait for a better time is strong. The mind will convince you that there are other, more favorable conditions just around the corner. But let us be reminded that the perfect moment is a mirage that vanishes the closer we get to it. The time is now. The call is clear. And what God is asking of us is not perfection, but obedience. It is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward in spite of it. The obedience He asks for is not in waiting for all things to fall into place, but in trusting that He who calls is already at work, preparing the way. In moving swiftly with God, there is not just the fulfillment of purpose, but the discovery of a deeper relationship with Him. The journey of obedience leads us not only to where we are meant to go, but also into a closer intimacy with the One who leads. His timing, His voice, His direction, each is an invitation to trust more deeply and to know Him more fully. For when God speaks, it is not just the task at hand that is important, but the transformation of our hearts as we respond in faith. When God says, "Do it now," it is a command that carries the weight of eternity. The blessing of obedience, swift, immediate, without hesitation, is not merely in what we accomplish, but in how we align ourselves with His will. The fruit of that obedience is far greater than any reward we could envision. It is the joy of walking in step with the Creator, the peace of knowing we're in the right place, at the right time doing the work He has called us to do. And so, let us move forward without hesitation. Let us step boldly into the calling He has placed before us, knowing that as we obey, He is already providing the strength, the wisdom, and the grace we need for each step. The time to act is now. The moment to fulfill your purpose is now, and in that now, you will find the abundant life He has promised, rich with His presence, filled with His purpose, and surrounded by His love. For in the end, it is not about waiting for the perfect moment, but about obeying the perfect call. The time is now, and in the now, you will find everything you need to walk in His will, to fulfill your purpose, and to live in the fullness of His grace.